Hey everyone, my name is Bradley Goss and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, welcome. Today we are talking about computer specs and how they contribute to your editing workflow. As a video editor, I am sure you have heard terms like core quad processor and X amount of gigs, or this graphics card is better than this graphics card. But I want to talk about exactly how these things contribute to your workflow so you can make a better decision when upgrading your hardware. So basically your processor is the brain of the computer. It's responsible for performing every task from clicking the mouse to typing on your keyboard, everything. Also, when we're talking about processors, typically you hear the amount of cores it has, and typically the general rule is the more cores your processor has, the faster your computer. And this is, again, normally true, except when it comes to Premiere Pro and other non-linear editing systems like Final Cut. If you have a 4-core processor and an 18-core processor, Premiere is not necessarily actually going to use these extra cores. Instead, what it allows you to do is have multiple programs running at once. You can have Premiere Pro, After Effects, Lightroom, Photoshop all open, and it's not going to bog your computer down on the 18-core processor as much as it would the 4-core processor. So really it comes down to whether or not you run all these programs simultaneously or not, and if you're willing to spend the extra $1,000 to be able to. When you're talking about processors, you hear the term gigahertz, and basically the most important function as a video editor is it's going to render and export your files quicker. And it's also going to decrease your booting time. It's going to open Premiere Pro faster once you double click on it. So here's a look at my old laptop specs to my new desktop iMac that I currently work on. As you can see, I went from an i5 at 2.3 gigahertz to an i9 at 3.6 gigahertz. To put this into perspective, if I was exporting a 1-minute video on both my laptop and my desktop iMac, it would take about 5 to 7 minutes on my laptop and probably about 1 to 1.5 minutes on my desktop iMac. So it is quite a difference when it comes to exporting and rendering files. So I'm not actually going to explain what gigahertz actually do, because there are already tons of great videos that explain everything in way more depth than I care to even begin to understand. Basically, just know that the higher gigahertz leads to faster render and export times on your projects. Next is another big one. It's called RAM, also referred to as memory. And basically it stores the data that your computer is currently using. And for most editing systems, 16 is more than enough to get you through, because at any point after 16, your computer is not actually using that RAM. Instead, what that extra RAM could be good for, in kind of the same way we talked about processors earlier, if you have multiple programs running, it's not going to slow your computer down. So if you're going to export a Premiere Pro or an After Effects file, you can still do other things like edit a Photoshop file or edit an image in Lightroom, and it's not going to slow your computer down. Because typically, After Effects only uses 10 to 12 gigs of RAM, regardless of how many it has to actually render its files. So 16 is really all you actually need, but if you want to go higher, you always can, because there's always going to be space for it, or always going to be a use for it. One thing I will say though, always buy your RAM aftermarket, because companies like Apple and Dell are going to charge you way too much, and it's super easy to install your own RAM after the fact. For example, I actually bought this at 8 gigs of RAM, and I just went on Amazon, and for $300 I bought 64 gigs of RAM. I saved, I think, anywhere between $600 and $800 when compared to buying that RAM already built into the computer from Apple. Now the SSD, and this is basically where all of your assets are stored. Again, taking a look at my current specs, I have a 500 gigabyte SSD. You do not necessarily need this big of one, depending on the size of the projects that you normally work on. In a recent video, I mentioned that you always want to work locally if you have the space to do so, and that's because anytime Premiere has to reference assets that are located on a drive outside the computer, it slows down your workflow. In terms of the graphics card, this is going to be most important for motion graphic projects in After Effects, or if you're doing pretty complex visual work within Premiere Pro, like title cards and subtitles and stuff like that. But for most people that are just doing the basic stuff, the stock graphics card that comes with your computer is going to be more than enough. But if you do want to take on some bigger motion graphics projects, or if you're an animator, or you do a lot of complex projects that involve title cards and subtitles and all that good stuff, you might want to look into getting a GPU, and at that point an external GPU, just to have a dedicated hardware system that can handle the stress that's going to put on your computer. But like I said, for most people, if you're just doing basic motion graphics and title cards and stuff like that, the stock graphics card is going to be more than enough, and I wouldn't worry about upgrading because those get very pricey very quickly. So that is a very brief overview of computer specs and how they impact your workflow as a video editor. If you like this video, if you learned something, please leave a like. And if you aren't already, please consider subscribing because I greatly appreciate every single one of you. And of course, if you have any questions at all, leave them in the comments. I will be sure to get to you as soon as possible. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you liked it. I hope it brought some good value to you. And of course, as always, find your reason to smile. Damar, get away from the camera. Damar, please. Why you gotta mess with everything all the time? Go away. Go. Go away. Do I need to get the spray bottle? Go. Stay away.